movie showed. He came to Iowa City on a tour. We sat down and had drinks, and he was apologizing to me. He says, "I apologize. I mean, that movie was awful. In fact, it was so bad. I asked him to take my name off the credits." He said it had nothing to do with my script or your book. That what happened was he did the script, 2 versions of the script, rewrites, and then Hallmark hired the director. The director then got hired in casting the players. And, excuse me. And then everything got rewritten on set, and it was a mess. I mean, the movie itself was not a well-made movie. The only saving grace is that, what is her name? Elizabeth.
Quite a well-known cast.
Elizabeth McGovern.
Yeah.
Played the mother. She was perfect. I mean, you couldn't ask for anybody to do that role better from my book than she did it. And that alone is worth watching the movie for. Everything else, no. No, they changed the names. They altered the plot. The big thing in the book is the kids turn 16. It's a coming of age story. President of Hallmark told me, we don't do sex on the beach. We don't do to dogs what you did to the dog. And so they had the main character only reach the age of 12, which threw out the main point of the book. But like my friend, it's an actor named Peter Coyote. He said, "Oh yeah, just quit your pitching, Larry."
Peter Coyote, wasn't he in The Right Stuff?
That was Sam Shepard.
No, yeah.
No, Peter Coyote might have been in a lesser role in The Right Stuff.
Yeah, might have been in a lesser role. Have you ever done a screen adaptation?
Beg your pardon?
Have you personally ever done a screen adaptation of somebody else's work?
I don't know. He was in E.T.
Oh, have you ever done one?
Oh no.
Written for the screen?
No, I've got a script out now for A Good Man, which is got 2 people trying to. It was optioned once and the option lapsed, and now it's being read again by a couple of different production companies. I had a great script about a music biography of Harry Chapin, which was actually got to be pitched around, and that fell through eventually. So it's a different. Hello?
Where are you from in real life, Larry?
I am not from Iowa. I have to keep pointing out to people. No, I was born in Louisiana and raised in Texas.
Very good. I spent the 5 most miserable years of my life in Texas.
Which part?
North of Fort Worth, right in the middle of the Fort Worth, Denton, Dallas Triangle. There, a little town called
I went to
Argyle.
Worth.
Had more horses than people.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with North Texas.
Yeah, North Texas University was a good school.
Yep, yeah.
My memories of Iowa, I went out one time to Cedar Rapids for business, and the sales rep picked me up at the airport, and as we were driving through downtown Cedar Rapids, I said, "What's that delicious smell?" And apparently it's the Quaker Oats factory.
Quaker Oats factory. See, that was the good side of town. If you went to the south side of town, you got the sugar processing, the ADM corn processing plant. That's a completely different smell. It's like, what is it, fructose overload. And anyway, it's a very different environment. And there's Lynn.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Hey,
Lynn.
I have made a trip to Iowa City, Larry. In 1970, soon after we were married, my husband had been accepted at the University of Iowa for graduate school. And we drove out to see if I could find a job. But there were hundreds of applicants for every opening. I applied for one that was doing an urban renewal project, and I think I was one of 800 applicants for the job, mostly wives or husbands of graduate students, it seems.
Right.
So we came back. He had been accepted at the University of South Carolina, and I had a job offer there. So, sorry, Iowa.
No, I was in Oklahoma in 1970. Got here in 1979 and stayed. It was a great town to grow up in. God, I was in my 40s. Well, no, I was growing up. I got in politics here, served 2 terms on the city council here. Boards and committees, urban planning, urban renewal, we're dealing with all that stuff even when I was here.
Well, it's pretty country, and it was a great trip. We had a good time. I think we might have preferred it to Columbia, South Carolina, which in the summer is the hottest place on earth.
Oh, well.
But
were you here in the winter time?
Huh?
Were you here in the winter time?
No, we were there in June.
Okay, you would prefer South Carolina.
You think so? Maybe so.
Lord.
Well, Larry and Lee, welcome and good morning to the Rare Book Cafe. This is the book lovers' rendezvous. You didn't know I could speak French, did you?
No, we didn't. We're learning.
Where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. We are the only live stream program on the internet devoted entirely to rare and collectible books and the people who love them. That's you. We're here every Saturday from 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 9:30 Pacific. I'm still having my cup of coffee. Good morning. 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time. And our guest today from Alexandria, Egypt, Sharif Afifi, it's 7:30 in the evening out there where he is, and we're so glad to have him with us. We're live streaming to you on Facebook, and as of a couple of weeks ago, on YouTube as well. We are a virtual cafe accessible anywhere in the world, any time of the day, and everyone is welcome, especially those of you who are book lovers out there. Hi, my name is Ed Markowitz, and I'm the proprietor of Montgomery Rare Books in Portland, Oregon. And I've got some really great news. Last week, for the very first time, the Rare Book Cafe became available as a podcast, as in audio-only podcast that you can listen to on your iPod. Does anybody still have an iPod? Well, if you've got one, you can listen to us on your phone, on your computer, or any other listening device that you have that delivers podcasts. We're now on there. Basically, our podcast is the soundtrack from the week's show. Our inimitable producer, Alan Smith, has introduced a few musical transitions like they do on NPR and a couple of introductions. But basically, it's the same show without the video. So you don't have to look at my ugly mug every week. And you can wander around the house with the iPod or iPhone or any phone in your pocket listening to this great show and our great guests. The same great show without the video. I, for one, wholeheartedly embrace it, and I think I'll go back and listen to it one more time before the week's over. Another development last week, our friends at Anchor accepted our show and is now beginning to deliver it as a podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podcast Net, Breaker, and Radio Public. Not public radio, but Radio Public. And very soon, the show will be delivered to you on several other podcast platforms. So we are really becoming quite the cat's meow. So now you can watch the Rare Book Cafe live, watch it on replay, listen to it on podcast. We're just humble book lovers every week, bringing you our fascination with all things biblio. So now on to the show. We've got a lot to cover today. We've got several very great live guests with me, as you saw at the beginning of the show, sitting around the cafe table. Lee Lynn of Ridge Books, Calhoun, Georgia. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning.
How is you?
Well, I'm fine. We went from 80 degrees early in the week to 47 this morning. Yes.
I know that's like 27 in Georgia.
Well, it is. I've been at the soccer field with my granddaughter, and it was rather chilly.
It's like 85 in Iowa.
Oh.
Oh, there he is. And our special guest today is author Larry Baker, author of A Good Man, The Education of Nancy Adams, and The Flamingo Rising. As we were talking about the show, The Flamingo Rising was made into a television motion picture in 2001. Not all authors can say that. And today, Lee and Larry are going to be discussing the work of Southern novelist Flannery O'Connor, whose birthday it is this week. Welcome, Larry and Lee.
Thank you.
Welcome. I need to point out to your viewers that I'm not guilty of just being very rigid and dead looking, but my computer freezes up. So actually, I move around a little bit, but that's not a bad picture of me there, I guess. Anyway, welcome.
Now, before the show's over, I'm sure we'll see you bopping around in your basement there.
I should, I don't want it to like suddenly, oh, see, there I went away, and I froze again. Luckily, I froze without my hand anywhere near my face. Okay. Anyway, thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. You're lucky. Most of our listeners and watchers are wishing that my picture would freeze as well, but you're stuck with me, folks. Also today, we've got several pre-recorded sessions. We're not trying to dupe anybody out there, but several of our guests can't make it every single week at this time, so we pre-record them. Coming up later today, we've got David Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange County, California, with his popular feature, Things Found in Old Books. Later, we're going to have Lynn Thompson of Henry Bemis Books in Chester, South Carolina, and he's also our associate producer. He's pre-recorded his feature, The Story Behind the Story, with features contributions of trend-setting children's illustrator Kate Greenway. Speaking of illustrators, later in the show, we're also going to have Mary Kay. Mary Kay is back with us this week. She's a tremendous Shakespearean illustrator. But our first guest this week is back with us, Sharif Afifi. Sharif, are you on? And maybe not. Sharif's dialing in from the Biblioteca of Alexandria. Some really fun things to share with us. Sharif may not be with us at the moment, so I think if Larry and Lee, you're ready to go. Share a little bit with us today about Flannery O'Connor, please.
Okay. Larry, do you want me to ask you questions, or do you want to just wing it?
Well, that's always dangerous to let me just start.
Okay.
About 4 directions.
I think you should get him juiced up and ask a couple of questions.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. I know one of the questions that I was going to ask was why were so many writers fascinated with O'Connor, but I don't think it's just writers. I think readers are so fascinated with O'Connor, and partly because of the differences in her work. And tell us a little bit about this fascination and what these differences are that really fascinate people. I saw a sign one time that said, in the South, we don't hide our crazy and weird people in the attic. We put them on the front porch and give them a glass of bourbon. And I think part of the fascination may be that, in a way, Flannery O'Connor does that with some of these weird characters. She sticks them out right in front of us.
Well, I absolutely agree. And I think the distinction I always like to make is that the characters that she creates are the kind of people that you want to know about, but you don't necessarily want to actually know in real life. You want to keep some distance between them, but they are this fascinating spectacle to look at and to consider. And the thing about O'Connor is nobody writes like O'Connor. I mean, that's one of the things that stood out to me as I was an English major for years in college and a teacher. It's like there's a Flannery O'Connor style, and then everybody else might have some version of it, but nobody actually replicates what she does. And it's a fascinating thing, the way she can just take, and she uses the word grotesque. take grotesque characters and give them some sort of meaning. It's more than just looking at a car wreck or a train wreck where you just can't turn your eyes away. There's a certain mystery to them that nobody else can create. I don't know about you, but I can remember the very first Flannery O'Connor story I ever read, which was A Good Man's Hard to Find, which is
me too.
was, and I don't think I can give it away because I assume that most people have read that story by now. But boy, when you get to that one line, when the misfit pulls out that pistol and does what he does to the grandmother, I stopped reading. My first thought, and I was just a teenager, was how the heck did that just happen? I did not see that coming. And yet what you learn over time is that's the only thing that story will allow to happen. It has to happen in O'Connor's world. And when he says she'd been a good woman, if there'd been somebody there every day to shoot her every day, took years to figure out. But once you figure it out, you understand O'Connor, and nobody else can pull that off. And I mean, that's a stylistic thing. It's a thematic thing. I have a more personal attraction to O'Connor, and I'm going to stop talking right now, Lee, because
well, would you, if you had to recommend one of her stories to a new reader of O'Connor, is A Good Man is Hard to Find the one you would recommend?
Oh, I'd always start with A Good Man and then go to Good Country People and then go to, what is that story? Is it The Misfits? The one with Tom T. Shiflett, and Good Country People and The Displaced Person. Again, all sorts of stories to begin with. But if you can get through A Good Man's Hard to Find,
I think if you're reading it for the first time, you somehow keep hoping that the grandmother is going to be able to talk him down.
Oh yeah.
That she's going to bring that good person out in him. But it's inevitable. It's inevitable. That's a story that when my husband taught at Shorter College in their evening classes for working people, people who were coming back to get a degree, he had them read, and most of them had no exposure to O'Connor at all. And the shock of that in his classes was always something that I kind of enjoyed waiting for.
Oh, yeah.
When they got there.
To teach that and to know what's coming, and your students come in the next day after they've been assigned that story, and they come, Mr. Baker, what's going on? Why'd you make us read that? And then I turn right around and I figured out there's a parallel story. I always sort of put this together, and that's Everything That Rises Must Converge,
right? Which
is a tremendous story with a very different kind of ending. But the women in that story are a type that O'Connor's very aware of. So it's and I don't think there's ever been a successful screen adaptation of O'Connor, because once you visualize it on the screen, they do become caricatures almost, and it's very hard to maintain the real depth of what she was doing in print.
Mm-hmm. And what you said earlier about these are people you want to know about, but not necessarily want to know, though. Growing up as a child in the 50s, of course, I hadn't read O'Connor, but like the family in A Good Man is Hard to Find are people I knew. Could have been me and my brother fighting in the back seat. I grew up in a 3-generation household. It could have been my family going to Florida. Some of these are people that we know, and
oh, absolutely.
Even some of the grotesques.
I think my family might have fit in there as well. I grew up in Louisiana in the 1950s. But what O'Connor does is take all of those types and go 1 or 2 steps beyond what we know. And she gets into the real Southern mind, also the Christian mind as well. And that's the other great thing that people don't like to really admit about O'Connor, but she was quite serious. She's a Catholic Christian writer. And everything she says, I think there's a wonderful quote about everything I do is grounded in that one fact. Here it is. I'm no vague believer. I see from the standpoint of Christian orthodoxy. And that means for me, the meaning of life is centered in our redemption of Christ by Christ. And I see everything in relationship to that. You've got to make that transparent in fiction. She's a rough writer because she takes things seriously that I think most Americans today don't take seriously, which is faith and religion and God. I mean, we're becoming less religious over time. I say this is coming from a Catholic agnostic now. So
how do you think her? Lately there have been a lot of discussion about her racism and this kind of thing, and how does her faith fit into that? Do you see her as racist, or is she a product of her time? Though I know a lot of folks have said, well, she should have been smarter than that. She wasn't exactly a country girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This really began about a year ago with that article in the New York Magazine by a guy named Paul Ellis, I think.
Right.
Because we have to reevaluate O'Connor. You cannot talk about her unless you confront her racism. And he makes this major sort of leap that I thought was dishonest, which was, he says, we read her letters and her journals, and we know her racial attitudes as seen in those letters and journals. And, people come to Flannery O'Connor nowadays by knowing the letters and journals, and that's completely false. If you're reading her letters and journals, it's because you've already read her stories and love her and want to find out more about her. So your impression is based upon her fiction, not her personal life. And that's part of the problem with American society today, which is like, how do you separate the public versus the private? The Jesuit college, Loyola, or someplace up in New Jersey, just took her name off of a building because they objected.
I think we lost him. Ed, are you there? I think we lost Larry. Well, we have a nice picture of Flannery O'Connor, and we want to talk some about the influence. Oh, you're there.
I'm there. Lee, you mentioned that we have several of our listeners said how much they loved Kate Greenway and how she wrote in the style of Flannery O'Connor. You think there are any modern authors that you can think of that may have tried to model themselves on Flannery?
Oh gosh,
is it that distinct of a style?
I think I could pick up a story I had not read and say that it was by her. I think it's that distinctive. I think other Southern writers kind of from the same generation, like Carson McCullers, occasionally there are some, not really parallels, but some characters, that are a little strange and that kind of thing. But I think she's I hate to use the word unique, but I think she comes close to that. I really do.
And of course, Lee, she died very young. She died when she was only 39 years old. She didn't have a chance to complete her entire life's works. But sometimes, whether it's Flannery O'Connor or Kurt Cobain, a very talented artist who passes too early, has a bit of mystique for the rest of their lives, or for the rest of their deaths.
You always wonder what they would have done later. Would their approach change? Would their style change? How would they mature as a writer? But it's what we've got. We've got what we've got of hers, and I don't think. I can't personally think of anybody that I would say is comparable like today. but I tend to read more stuff from her era than I do from current stuff. So,
Great.
so who knows?
And her birthday's coming up this week, right?
Yes, I am interested in getting Larry back to find out. I just finished reading A Good Man, and was interested to see the influences of Flannery O'Connor in that story, and would like really to hear more from him about her influence on his work. So I hope we haven't lost him for good.
Well, if we let's move on to a pre-recorded session. Maybe that'll give us a chance to get back in touch with him and get him back on to finish up the interview. If not, we'll certainly have him back. So right now we're going to move on to Things Found in Old Books by our bookman David Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California. Let me remind you, if you found anything in an old book, please send us a picture and tell us a little bit about it. All right, Alan, let's line it up.
Hello, this is David Hess from the Bookman in Orange, California, with my weekly segment on things found in old books. And today we have 4 more items for your approval, and we'll jump right in and see what we found this week. We found in this textbook, A First View of English and American Literature. This book here came out in 1909, and within this book, I found this business card. Now, it says, Republican candidate for representative of Allen County to the state legislature, Nathaniel C. Ross. Subject to the decision of the Republican primaries, May 7th, 1918, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Now, I did a little research on Nathaniel C. Ross in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and came up with 0. I can find no record of him or his office. So I'm imagining that he probably did not get elected to the legislature. But he did have a card, and he would hand it out to you, and later on you could actually use it for a bookmark. In this book here, which came in a box of old books, and it basically missing the whole front end papers and the whole signature of pages in here. So the book was actually headed for the dustbin of the book world. And it's kind of a religious text. It's called The White Angel of the World. And again, I just kind of was leafing through it. And I found something I found very interesting. I found it quite fascinating. Folded up in the back. What it is a Sears Roebuck from Chicago order form for wallpaper. And it's blank, so no one has filled it in, but it gives you a good idea of how things were ordered and taken care of back in the 1910s. Up here in the corner, it says 191. So you would either fill in 0 through 9, whatever the year was in the 1910s. And so this is from 1910-ish order form for wallpaper. And you'd get the catalog number and the color and the thing, you put it there and you write in your own price, and it tells you here how to send the money. It recommends you don't send coins because it could ruin the envelope. And so you should wrap up the coins and send them that way. But preferably they would rather have a money order or bank express thing. So I found that quite fascinating. It's a little piece of Americana stuck in a book that, had I not flipped through it, it probably would have lost forever, because the book is dead. This one is a little more current. It's a 1970 book. It's on the Comanches on the Peace Path. It's about the signing of a treaty in Texas. Now, the book was written in 1970. Within the book, this actually applies to the book that it came in, is a newspaper article written about the lady who found the peace treaty in her attic or whatever. So she found the peace treaty that this book talks in depth about, that whole time and place. And then here on the follow-up back page of the article, I'll hold it a little closer. It's not very good reproduction, but this painting that they put in the newspaper is actually the front cover of this book. So it applies, the article applies to the book, and it's quite an interesting article about the treaty and her finding the treaty. But also, because I like to read the back of these papers, I find articles that I think are truly interesting. It mentions up here, Bush seeks vote from businessmen, but this is long before President Bush. He was a senator, a U.S. representative back then, so he was in the news in the 70s. But also down here at the very bottom of the back here, it says, Janis Joplin's estate will go to her family. And it's just a little column there about how the deceased Janis Joplin, her estate, will go to her family. And that was a little item I found in this paper. Very interesting. I find this stuff just fascinating. I love it. I love this stuff. And lastly, in another book that's relatively current, in fact, it shows up a lot, called Cinders and Smoke. It's about the railroads. And in this, I found an authentic photograph. This is a real photograph. It's not a reproduction. And we will show you a close-up. And it's a picture of a train crash. The train has been derailed, and there's people sitting around looking at it, and the train is just a mess in this rocky overcrop. And on the very back, someone has written Union Pacific number 835, location unknown. And below that, somebody here has written Victorville. Victorville is a little desert town out here in California. So, and it looks very California desert-y looking, and but there is no date on the picture, unfortunately, and the book doesn't reveal any date or time or that I can discern dealing with the photograph. So that's it for today. That's all I have. And I'll see you next week with a few more items that I've found in used books over time. Now, if you have something that you would like to share that I can share with the public, why don't you email me at info@ebookman.com. Send a picture of what you found and a brief description, and we'll include it in the show. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Hey, welcome back. Thank you, David. I stepped out for a moment and brought back one of my good friends that David had reminded me of. I'll let you take a look at him right here. Yeah, that's a cutout of my favorite president, George H.W. Bush. And just a little personal editorial. I think that the 1,000 Points of Light program that George H.W. Bush brought to his presidency, where every year during his administration, he noticed and gave acknowledgement to a nonprofit somewhere in America, was one of the greatest things we ever did. All right, back to the real show about books. Sharif Afifi, curator and from the Bibliotheca Alexandria in Alexandria, Egypt, is with us now. Sharif, have you made it? Let's see if we could bring in Sharif.
Hello.
Hey, there he is.
Yeah. How are you?
Very fine, very fine. Good to hear you. Can't see you yet, but before you dive in, Sharif, I just want to thank you so much for bringing Iman Ali Salim to our show last week. She is just a dynamo. She's just a dynamic ball of energy that doesn't stop smiling. What a wonderful person she is.
Yes, actually she is.
You're great to have her for a colleague.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sharif, what are you sharing with us this week?
This week we'll talk about a little bit science of conservation. I'll try to make it as easy as much as I can. But we will talk about the non-destructive analysis techniques which make invisible visible. Can I share a little presentation? I think that I can share
it.
Yeah,
please do. I think it would help us baseline where you're coming from.
Okay. First of all, is it visible now?
Not quite yet. Should be up in a moment.
Okay.
There we go.
To make things much more simple, let's talk about how we see colors, how we see things. The white light comes on a surface, and then that surface observe all the color except for the color which is should be seen. That is the mechanism of how we can see colors or any objects. So to make a definition, so the wavelengths go through an object and it goes through our eyes, and our eyes act as a detector to detect the color or the object. For instance, if we are seeing a green, as I've already explained before, the full length of the visible lights, the other yellow and the green and magenta red or whatever, go through the object and only reflect the green light. If we have blue and green, it will reflect cyan. If we have red and blue, it will reflect magenta. If we have red and green, it will reflect yellow, and so on. That's how we see. That's how we see color. That's how humans see color. Normally, humans see colors in a range of 380. Approximately we say 400, but actually it's from 380 to 700 nanometers. Here is the full length of the spectrum which a human can see. But guess what? This is a very small part from the spectrum range which is discovered till now. So we have a spectrum which has been discovered from 0.001 nanometer to 100 meter. To just make it simple, if you go, if the wavelength is increasing, it means that you have a lower energy. If the wavelength, the distance between the wavelengths is smaller, it means that you have a higher energy. For instance, the radio wave, the wavelength of radio wave may be like the distance between two football stadiums, football playground. Okay, So the human can see only a very tiny, very small range from the full spectrum, of the wavelengths. That's how we can see. What is the detectors in our retina? We have two types of detectors, which we called it rods and cones. Rods, it's sensitive to light and dark changes, so it can see it is dark or light. And cones, it's sensitive to the red and green and blue colors, which is the basic colors. That's why when we are in a dark room, we only see in black or only see black shadows, because our cones is not sensitive to see in dark. Only the rods can see in dark. That is the mechanism of seeing the object, how human see the object, or how human can see. As I've already explained before, that we as a human can see a very tiny range from the spectrum, which is from 380 nanometer to 700 nanometer. But guess what? The goldfish has a different spectrum range, which it can, or she can see through, from 700 nanometer to 1 millimeter, which is in the range of infrared. So goldfish can see things which is not visible for human. And for the bumblebee, also can see the range from 10 nanometers to 380 nanometers, which mean it is in the ultraviolet range. It can see a part from the visible range and a very huge part from the ultraviolet range, as well as the goldfish.
Excuse me, Sharif. I think we're
Yeah.
a little bit behind on the slides. Can you click the slides and catch us up?
Yeah. Which slide we are now?
We're
Which have
still.
The slide which has golden fish and
Yeah,
the goldfish.
we can't see that. Click on that one. Maybe refresh that and bring us back up to speed there. If not, if it's not
Now,
moving,
it's not moving, so we can go down like this, like that. Now it's moving.
we're not there yet. Should be in a moment. Okay, go ahead. Continue with the audio portion, Sharif, and maybe the slides will catch up. Is Sharif still with us? One of those days, folks. Let me put on my tap shoes and we're going to continue on. We seem to have lost Sharif, so we're our next segment coming up is one of our weekly segments. Lynn Thompson. This week, Lynn is considering Kate Greenway, whose illustrations greatly influenced how children dressed during the Victorian era. So we've got lots of female authors on the show this week. Flannery O'Connor, and now we're going to roll into Lynn's session on Kate Greenaway.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Thompson with The Story Behind the Story, our weekly look at authors and their books and how they interacted with the world around them and after them. This week, we're going to begin a 2-week look at two of the principal innovators of the modern children's book, both born in the same year of 1846. This week is the birthday of Catherine Kate Greenaway, born in 1846, died in 1901, one of the leading illustrators of the Victorian era. In an age when women had few career options, Being artistically inclined opened a few doors, and she was educated at the Royal College of Art. She illustrated her first published work in 1867 at the age of 21. Greenway produced her own first book, a collection of children's verses called Under the Window, in 1879, and it turned out to be an immediate bestseller. Her style, like Randolph Caldicott's, and we'll be talking about him next week, is instantly recognizable. Kate Greenway children, all of them little girls, and boys too young to be put in trousers, were dressed in her own versions of late 18th century and Regency fashions. Smock frocks and skeleton suits for boys, high-waisted pinafores and dresses with mob caps and straw bonnets for girls. The influence of children's clothes in portraits by British painter John Hopner, who lived from 1758 to 1810, may have provided some of her inspiration. In more recent times, Liberty of London adapted Kate Greenaway's drawings as designs for actual children's clothes. The influence that she had was enormous. A whole generation of mothers in the liberal-minded, quote, artistic British circles who called themselves the Souls and embraced the arts and crafts movement dressed their daughters in Kate Greenaway pantaloons and bonnets in the 1880s and 1890s. The style was also used by painter Maud Goodman in her depictions of children, as in the works of Frances Hodgson Burnett. The author of Little Lord Fauntleroy, Greenway's work shows the confluence of art, commerce, and taste-making in the dawn of mass marketing, mass production, and the heyday of the private circulating library. By the 1880s, Greenway had become a brand name, publishing Kate Greenaway's birthday book, Christmas Carols, Alphabet, Album, Book of Games, and a painting book. Greenway was also a successful designer of book plates. She was elected to the Royal Society of Artists in Watercolors in 1889. In her 35-year career, she illustrated 62 books, most using chromo-oxylithography, a printing process with pictures from engraved colored ink blocks. The past master of this process and her frequent collaborator was Edmund Evans. Greenway was not one to shy from new technologies, though. One of her last books at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th was produced using the new technology of color lithography. Rivaled only by Caldecott and Walter Crane, Greenaway's authors included Bret Harte, Robert Browning, John Ruskin, Robert Ellis, and Andrew Lang. She divided her time between an arts and crafts style manse she commissioned in the London suburb of Frognall and a summer place near Nottingham. Greenway died of cancer in 1901. In 1955, the Kate Greenaway Medal was launched to honor the best children's book of the year in Britain. So that's a brief look at one of the two authors we're featuring this month, authors and illustrators, who had an enormous influence on how children's books and indeed children's fashions look today. If you want to see an example of the influence that she had by way of the American author Frances Hodgson Burnett, for example, look up Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was inaugurated on this day in 1933. There are pictures of him as a boy, dressed in a sort of silk dress, knee socks, and with long curly hair. That was the fashion that Greenway passed on and that Hodgson Burnett adopted for her books and transported across America among the upper classes. So that's, again, how Authors and their books can have all kinds of surprising and unintended influences across the decades. Next week, we'll be looking at another great illustrator of the time, Randolph Caldecott. And until then, I'm Lynn Thompson, and that's the story behind the story.
I think we've got Sharif back with us, but before we go to Sharif, I want to make an unpaid cultural announcement. The Rare Book Cafe is all about the love of books. And if there's one thing a book will never do to you, it's go black. You don't have to reboot a book. You're very unlikely to have technical problems with a book. And this is it. This is why we're here today. So sorry about some of those early technical problems, but I think we have them resolved. And now we're going to start back up with Sharif Afifi. Well, he's got a wonderful presentation. He put a lot of effort into it that complements his presentation quite well. Sharif, are you with us?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry for that. And yes, you are right, Edie. I'm always saying that if we lose connection, if we lose electricity, and we don't have books, it means that we don't have knowledge. That's why digitization, it's a very good scope, but please make a conservation and preserve your written collection. We can go back to the presentation. I hope that it's maybe because of the science. That's why the internet connection go mad. I don't know. So I will try to share it again with you, and
please do.
I will roughly go through the slides, and if it is not apparent, please let me know. The first slide,
Okay,
it's how we see colors. That is the first slides. Is it shown now?
Yep, you're on.
Yeah,
looks good.
So I will go fastly on that segment. That how we can see. I've already explained that the wavelengths and how the wavelengths affect how we can see through the light, and what is the range of our visible range. I've already explained that the human can see from the visible range is between 380 to 700 nanometers, which is a very, very tiny part from, as we can see here, we have the full spectrum of the wavelengths from 0.001 nanometer to 100 meter. That is the full spectrum, and human can see only that very small part from the spectrum. That's why we cannot see the internet wireless connection. We cannot see the radio waves. We cannot see the infrared. We cannot see the ultraviolet and X-ray and gamma rays and so on. That is the mechanism. What is the detectors which is inside our retina? We have two types of detectors, rods and cones. I hope it's appear here in my presentations. Rods is sensitive to light and dark, and cones is sensitive to colors like red and green and blue. That's why we cannot see in the dark. We only see shapes or in black only. Imagine that human can see in a range of 400, approximately from 400 nanometer to 700 nanometer, but the goldfish can see from the range of 700 to 700 nanometer to 1 millimeter, which is in scope of the infrared. So it can see from apart from the visible light and apart from the infrared spectrum. The bumblebee can see in a range between 10 nanometers to the 380 nanometers as well. So it is the bumblebees can see in a range of the ultraviolet. So As a conservators, we are believing in that the less you do is the best you do. We are
Excuse me,
trying.
Sharif, your slides aren't advancing. Could you click on the next slide just to see if it's moving forward, please?
That's back and that's forward. Now,
Yeah.
now we are in a slide titled "What if conservators can see also as a goldfish and bumblebees?"
Okay, we didn't make it to that one.
Oh, so I will leave it. So
okay, go ahead.
So now it's
there we
available.
go.
Here we
Yep.
go. Well, I think it will be better to just play it like that. Okay. As a conservators, we are believing in the less you do is the best you do. So we're trying to minimize any intervention to the object. Now we're trying to use less chemicals, use less analysis, especially the destructive analysis, and we go for the non-destructive analysis like the multispectral imaging. Multispectral imaging giving the conservators the facilities and the eyes of the goldfish and bumblebee and the human for sure. So as I've already explained before, it is safe and non-invasive or non-destructive, and it is totally safe. I will give a small hint. I will make it much more easier. The infrared can penetrate the infrared spectrum. Spectral can penetrate through the layer, and ultraviolet can only go to the surface of the object, can see the surface of the object. For instance, I will explain that. I will show some pictures about the range of the visible and infrared and ultraviolet as well. So what we can do in imaging to see, like as I've already explained, we can use the visible light, we can use the grazing light, we can use the transmitted light, ultraviolet light, and infrared. For sure, we all know what is the visible light using our camera or using our microscope, or optical microscope. Through the optical microscope, we can enlarge and maximize the visibility of very tiny objects. And through the digital cameras or new normal analog cameras, we can make a picture and visual identification for the object. But if we are using a grazing light or racking light technique, putting a light in a 5 to 30 degree to the object, as I've already shown here on the presentation, we can reveal some data like cracks, as I've already seen here, like strokes, like tension on the frame of the painting, as for instance, the strokes, or what we call the impasto, which is the effect of the drawing. So through the grazing light, we can reveal all these information. As well as here is an example on writing on a drawing on a manuscript for Michelangelo. He've already tried to just make an outline on a parchment manuscript. Here is the image with the visual light. The top here is the image with the visual light. And here is the image with the grazing light. And it appears that it is a part from the Capella Sistina in Rome. So we have already revealed a lot of information from this type. For sure that we are using an imaging with transmitted light to see the watermark and the chain and lead lines, which give us a lot of information about the origin and the place and the paper from which origin, from which period it come. So we've already had a lot of information from that type of transmitted light. Now we will go to the ultraviolet. I will not explain the mechanism of the excitation of the electrons, but I will go directly to talk about the ultraviolet light and what it can reveal. Ultraviolet, we need to have a detectors like a camera, which is something like our eyes, but it is a camera which has a sensor with ultraviolet detector, and ultraviolet source or ultraviolet light source. The camera will detect the reflection from the source, the captured source. So if we would like to capture the ultraviolet, we will put a filter to filter only the UV image, the ultraviolet image. As we can see here, it is in a drawing. The first one on the left, which is the imaging using a visual light, the visible light, and the other one is using an ultraviolet reflection. As we can see here, the reflected part or the luminance part, it gives us an identification, it gives us an information that is the original varnish which has been used, and the other part which is reflected the image itself, it gives us an information that that part has already the original varnish has been removed or deteriorated or not exist. Ultraviolet can give us information about the surface. For instance, here using an ultraviolet, the reflection came from the paper, but the iron gall ink is already observe the ultraviolet waves. That's why it can reveal the reading. The paper on the right and on the left, I mean, it has the ink is already faded, but the paper on the left, as we can see, we have already making an imaging using an ultraviolet, and we revealed the text, which now can be accessible and we can read it. Mold as well, if you just use an ultraviolet over parchment or over a paper, and you have a moldy surface which cannot be shown through the visual, the visible range. You cannot see it with your eyes. It will give you a greenish appearance, as we can see here. The left one is normal visible, and the right one using ultraviolet. As well as we can use an ultraviolet in a different techniques, in the different detectors, and we can reveal as much as information from the surface of the object, of the surface of the manuscript or of the book. As I've already explained before, when we are using an infrared reflected image, the infrared wavelength, the infrared wave had the ability to penetrate through a layer. For instance, here we have two images, which will give us an idea. If we have an image which has been captured using visual light, you will see completely the image, the color, and everything. But if you capture it with only the infrared detector, and you will filter all the visible wavelengths, it will detect only the the basic underdrawing lines of the painting. That can help us to identify the signature on a paint, the basic lines of the painter, and as well as if the painter has decided to change his mind, we can detect that through the infrared imaging. As we can see here, the crown for the visible light here. Don't look at the square. I'm just pointing on the crown. The artist, he've already made the crown on the top of the head, but suddenly, for some reason, he've already decided to change his mind, and he decided to make it in such position. With our naked eyes, with our visible light, it will never be seen. But when using an infrared spectrum, that is possible to see it. We also can identify the fake bends or fake drawing. And also why sometimes when we are doing cloning for another institution, we are making like a fingerprint using an infrared and ultraviolet, and when it came back, we are making the same fingerprint to be sure that it's the same layer, the same underpainting layer, and the same stroke and the same everything. Because if you are trying to fake an artifact, you will never be able to fake all the layers. So to just make sure. Here is an example as well for virus type of infrared techniques. Here is in a manuscript, a Persian manuscript, and we can see here that is the visible light image, and under the infrared reflected image we can see like a character here, someone here has been drawn before, but for some reasons they decided to just eliminate it, and by the infrared we can just see the invisible character. For instance, as well, writing that is a parchment manuscript which has been burned, and through the infrared we can reveal the burned part, the written text on the burned part. In a papyrus as well, we have the same techniques, we can use it. In infrared, we have another technique called an false color technique, which is we have two images, an visible light image and infrared image. For the visible light image, we have the red and the green and the blue. We filter that to the layer of red and green and blue, RGB. And we have the IR. Through a specialized computer system, it gives us we are mixing these four layers through that computerized system, and it gives us an image which is a color image, but we called it infrared false color image. Through that false color image, we can identify the pigments. For instance, if we have red pigments or blue, for instance, if we have a blue azurite or blue ultramarine, it will appear for our eyes, for our naked eyes, as a blue. It will be a blue. But if we are using a false color technique, the azurite will appear bluish, but the ultramarine will appear as a cherry red. So through that technique, we can identify either the different chemical composition of the pigments, or any further conservation or restoration which has been made early on the service of the artifact. As well as we can just enhance the contrast of the image, and we can reveal the text. That's why the multispectral imaging is a technique, is a non-invasive technique, non-destructive analysis technique, which give you a full range of information which is not available for our eyes and not available for the visible range, and it is non-destructive technique. I will talk about two cases to give you an idea what we are doing. As we can see here, we have a manuscript, which is that's two manuscripts here, that two papers from the one manuscript. The first part in the upper here, it's in the visible range, and the other part in the visible range, we cannot read clearly the text because of the acidity of the paper. It's iron gall ink, so I'm sorry, it's a carbonic ink, and the paper has some acidity on the middle. But using infrared with the CCD detector, we can clearly, as we can see, we can very clear reading the text. As I've already mentioned before, we have the first text here on the other side. We have the first text here with a red color. And when we have already captured the image using infrared with a CCD sensor, we have already, as we can see here, the red color is already like a transparent. Nothing is there. We've already faced a case of a burned, acidity burned manuscript. It is from the 19th century, and the paper was fully acidic, as we can see on the image here, and even we cannot touch it. It was very brittle during the period of using alum as a sizer, and it was heavily sized with alum. That's why during the course of years, it has been affected, and now it is fully deteriorated, and the acidity, as we can see, that it is fully acidic. A conservator can do nothing. We cannot do any aqueous treatment, otherwise it will create more hydrolysis, and it will break the cellulose, and it will completely destroy the paper. And we cannot do an aqueous treatment because it will create more dehydration, and it will make it much more brittle. And as well as we cannot touch it, we cannot handle it, we cannot foliate the manuscript, and it was actually in a very bad condition. And for sure, if we leave it for more 10 or 20 years, it will completely finish. That's why we've already we need the text. We need to read the text. We need the science of these manuscripts to be available for the readers. That's why we've already used the IR technique. As we can see here, the first part is the imaging using visible light, and the second part using the IR false color, and the third part using IR with the CCD sensor. And now we can read that text. We've already imaged that manuscript using these that multispectral imaging technique, and we print it back, and it is now available for readers to read it. And as well, we have already discovered the chain lines and the lead lines of the paper, which give us the identification of that is an original Islamic paper made, because we have an codicology information about the Islamic made, which has sometimes 3 or 2 chain lines together. As we can see here, we have 3 chain lines here and 3 chain lines here. That is an Islamic manuscript. Recently, I've already received questions from one of my friends about one of the rare books from the 17th century, I guess, and someone tried to hide the seals here, the stamps here. We have several stamps here, and someone used the marker to hide it. Either he don't want to show who is the owner, because maybe it's an ownership seal, or because some reason we don't know about. If we would like to read what was written on it, and the conservator will go for instance, using a solvent to try to erase the marker, for sure he is going to erase as well the stamp. Especially most of the stamps are not stable. It means that you will erase the marker, and you will erase the stamp, and you will remove all the historical evidence which is inside the object or the manuscript, the book. We are recommended just leave it as it. Go to a local science lab and search for an infrared multispectral imaging technique. Using an infrared multispectral imaging technique, it will reveal the data underneath the marker. Then you will have the data, and you will have the full information, and you will keep the original part untouchable. I hope that it will be simplified as I have already planned.
Very good, Sharif. Our audience, our live audience, really enjoyed that. They got a couple of questions for you here.
Okay.
One from Sophia Bogle, one of our great advocates and champions of the show. When you restore a book, do you ever paint it back to its original color, or is that a big no-no? Would you ever add new color to an illustration which has perhaps faded?
No, never. We never add any new color or any new material to an original object. It's as a concept. It's an international concept. It's one of the international code of ethics, which is keeping the originality of the object. We never just paint it again or make it. I'm talking about the manuscripts and the rare books, but it's a difference on the painting restoration, because it's based on the art itself, how fine it is and how attractive it is. That's why we have a lot of techniques to just add colors for the missing parts, either by hatching or dot, or just using recommended acrylic colors. But in manuscripts and rare books, we never do that, and we never complete a text. If we have a missing text on a paper, even if we know that is, especially in the manuscript, even if it is an holy text and we know what should be written, we never complete it and write it again. That's something ethically wrong.
Yeah. Sharif, I have to guess that this amazing technology was used on the Shroud of Turin once upon a time. Is that true? And if it was, what did they find out?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
Was this technology ever used on the Shroud of Turin, the famous cloth that allegedly Jesus was wrapped in?
Actually, I have no information. I don't know, but I believe that that new technology, it's already widely spread in all the conservation labs all around the world. As I've already explained, that is one of the recommended technique for identifying a lot of information, pigments, underlayer paintings, and varnish, and a lot of information. I believe that it's already widely used, so why not?
Yeah, from our one of our contributors, Richard Minsky, he asks a question: does your library ever loan out material? And if you do, would you use this spectroscopy on the material before you loaned it out, so to make sure that a forgery was not returned?
Yeah. Actually, we have a special team for the multispectral imaging who already help us in doing such techniques with all the materials. And if we are loaning a very unique object, we tend to do. Actually, we've already have like a fingerprint from most of the recognized and important artifacts which we have, and we compare that fingerprint with the original when we retrieve it back from the loaning. It's a protocol, not only us doing that, but most of the heritage institutions all around the world and museums are doing that as well.
Fascinating. Let's close with one last question. What is one fascinating, interesting, unpredicted thing that you have found on papyrus specifically using this technology?
On papyrus,
anything come to mind?
No. On papyrus, especially on papyrus, no, nothing. But on manuscripts, as I've already explained, the example which I've already shown, that is one of the one of the very hard project which we were working on it. The manuscript was completely deteriorated, and we even for these pages, we don't even know what is written on it. And after making that imaging technique, we've already revealed all the information and the text, and we discover the type of the paper, which is an Islamic paper. And that is one of the paper which is not commonly used in the 19th century. That was strange for us as well.
Great, Sharif. I understand an audience could never find this type of information anywhere other than the Rare Book Cafe. I understand You're going to be back with us next week. What's our topic for next week, Sharif?
The mending technique. We will go for the episode 2, talking about the straight cut and how to correctly, professionally mend a straight cut on your paper.
Very good. Well, before you leave us, Sharif, I'd like to point one thing out. My book has never run out of batteries, and I've never had to recharge it.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you.
All right, we'll see you next week, Sharif.
See you then. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, now our next live guest is Mary Kay Watson from Morgantown, West Virginia. This week, Mary Kay is going to share with us a little bit of about the illustrations of Peter Pan. Hi, Mary Kay.
Hi, how are you doing?
Tip top.
Good. Yeah, when I was doing my research for George du Maurier, I happened across James Barrie. And I don't think that James Barrie actually knew George du Maurier, or at least they weren't friends, but they each had a Saint Bernard dog. And there's another connection to George du Maurier that everyone probably knows about, but may not realize, that Sylvia, George du Maurier's daughter, was married to Arthur Llewellyn Davies, and they had 5 boys, and those are the boys in the James Barrie books, Peter Pan. James Barrie had a rough childhood in some ways. His older brother died when he was 14. He was drowned the day before his birthday. And I don't think that James Barrie's mother ever really got over that. She held on to that grief. And so James spent most of his life trying to seek her love. And I think it affected his relationship with women. And I don't know why, but he was very childlike. He enjoyed playing with the Davies boys. He was married, didn't have any children of his own, but they actually lived across the square from the Davies family. And I believe the stories are that he had met the Davies family over in Kensington Gardens. And I think I sent a picture of a Google Earth picture of Kensington Gardens, how it looks now. And it plays a big role in the Peter Pan books. Anyway, he actually probably met Sylvia Davies at dinner parties. I did some more research and found out that there was a lord and lady in London that actually had both James Barrie and Sylvia Davies at the same dinner parties. And usually Sylvia and James were seated next to each other. So they knew each other, not just from their walks in Kensington Gardens with the children. But I read a couple books for this little talk today. And actually for my research for the du Mauriers, I read these books. And I read this book, Neverland. And it's a little controversial. There's a lot of research in here. Some of it's good research, some of it's just speculation. But there was also an excerpt in this book of the Little White Bird. And I have to admit that I was not exposed to Peter Pan growing up. I read Arthur Conan Doyle. I read Edgar Allan Poe, Lewis Carroll, Shakespeare, but never James Barrie, never the Peter Pan books. I've seen the Disney movie because I had children of my own, but that's my limit. So I did go back and read The Little White Bird. And the excerpt that's in the Neverland book is very disturbing. It's what we were talking about, what Lee and Larry were talking about, and what Lindsay talked about with Dr. Seuss. Would the author go back and change what he's written? And there was never anything brought out by the Davies boys or the Davies family about Barrie being inappropriate with the boys. But that one excerpt in the book, in The Little White Bird, it makes you wonder. I've kind of lost my train of thought here, but I don't judge what I read based on things like that. I look at the art for its own sake. And I have to say that, that was my first experience reading one of James Barrie's books, and it was wonderful. It was very enchanting. I liked the book. That's really, there's just so much to get into with the du Maurier family and James Barrie. So I can't hear you, Ed.
Oh, I said in the Peter Pan books.
I'm sorry, I still
Did you have a favorite character in the Peter Pan story?
No, not really. I just liked the way he, I'm an artist, so I liked the way he painted the picture. He was talking about what was happening in real life, and then he got into this fantasy world, and he introduced Peter Pan in this book. The Little White Bird is the first time that Peter Pan is actually introduced into the book, and he's telling the story to the little boy named David that's in the book, and he's telling the story of Peter Pan, and so
I think you mentioned earlier that we know who the Lost Boys are, the five Lost Boys in the Peter Pan book. Do we know who Peter Pan was modeled after?
Well, there's a couple schools of thought. One that I like is that James Barrie modeled Peter, or took the name Peter because of Peter Ibbotson, which was George du Maurier's book and his main character, because that book was such a big seller that it was so popular at the time. So I really like, that maybe that's who Peter was. But the common school of thought is that Peter Davies, one of the five boys in the Davies family, that he was actually Peter. And he said until the day he died, he actually committed suicide when he was at retirement age. He was planning to retire and took the day off and went and spent the day in a restaurant and a bar, and then he jumped in front of a subway train. But he had said all of his life that he was not Peter Pan, that the book was not named after him. But it's kind of a tragic ending to his story. The Davies, Sylvia and Arthur, both passed away when they were 40 years old, within 1 year of each other. And they actually left their children's guardianship to James Barrie. So it's hard for me to believe some of the accusations that come his way as far as being inappropriate with the boys. He raised the boys, and he also gave all of the boys, set them up in businesses. Peter Davies actually, I believe, was a publisher, and James Barrie had set him up into that publishing house. And when James Barrie passed, the rights to the Peter Pan books went to a children's hospital. So that children's hospital still makes money off of those books.
Interesting. Great.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. One of these days, you're going to have to show us some of your own illustrations, Mary Kay. I'm looking forward to that.
I'm still trying to find my niche here, but I will. Yes.
Okay. All right, Miss Niche. We'll see you in a week or two. All right, folks. Our next guest, very interesting for those of us book lovers and booksellers out there, Richard Morey. Did I see you online already, Richard? There he is. Hey, good afternoon.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you great. Good morning. Great. Good afternoon, wherever you happen to be.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I hope you don't mind. I'm wearing my flannel shirt today. I normally would have my Florida shirt on, but it's in the 60s today, so I've had to warm myself up with a flannel.
Of course, I don't mind. Wearing a shirt is better than not wearing a shirt. So whatever you've got on. We've also got a graphic up on the screen of the Northern New England Book Fair. I understand, Richard, that you are likely to have the very first live book fair since the pandemic shut the industry down over a year ago. Tell us about that.
Well, barring a new pandemic or some other godly action, we will be having a book fair in Concord, New Hampshire, June 5th and 6th of this year. And it's going to be a 2-day event. So we're pretty sure it's going to happen at this point.
How many book dealers, how many tables, how many booths are you looking to have?
Well, I'm expecting we're going to have someplace close to 60 dealers. The show had diminished a little bit in size a few years ago, but I think that there's a pent-up demand this year. I've already got a number of ABAA dealers who have shown a lot of interest in the show. I actually haven't sent out contracts yet, but those are going out probably this week. And we're expecting to have a good floor.
Great. I imagine there'll be the typical COVID precautions still, wearing masks, washing hands, limiting the number of people in the event space.
of course, we don't know what the requirements will be at that time, but whatever the state of New Hampshire and the city of Concord, New Hampshire require, that's what we'll do. I'm sure that there'll be still some mask wearing, but here's what I also am sure of. There will be a lot more persons who have been vaccinated at that time, and I think the concern of public safety is going to start to diminish, and that the realization that the vaccination program is working and successful is going to be pretty much understood by June.
Great. Richard, last week we had Marvin Getman on to talk about this weekend's ephemera fair from the Ephemera Society of America, which is going on right now. It opened right about the same time our show went on. What does your crystal ball tell us about the future of book fairs? Are we going to see some sort of hybrid between online fairs and live fairs in the future? What are you thinking?
Well, Marvin is an old friend. I've been doing his shows, I don't know, probably 20 years. I started doing his antique shows before he was doing book shows. I'd like to say I was doing his antique shows before he knew what a book was. But in fact, he has become, the guy on the ground in the book world. He's made the shows in Boston and New York extremely successful, Brooklyn, extremely successful shows, and he has a huge following because of that. And the virtual shows, I think, have had, they Marvin was there when the time was right, and he was extremely successful at doing the virtual shows. But I'm also a guy who's out in the community, and I go to antique shows and book shows when they're running. And the people I talk to, the people I see at the shows down here in Florida this winter, they're hungry. They want to come back. They want to be touching books. They want to be talking to people face to face. The shows may come back a little slow. But I can't predict how quickly they'll come back, but they're coming back. There's no question in my mind.
Sure. Now, Richard, you're a book dealer as well. Tell us a little bit about your store. What do you specialize in, and how have you been able to do anything special to survive business the last year?
Well, we've all had to be creative this last year. I closed my store years and years ago, but so for the last, close to 15 years, my life has basically been shows. So this past year, with the lack of shows, it's been a little different, but we've managed. Like everybody else, I came up with alternative streams of fundraising and money raising, and book selling, and I'm I've tightened my belt like we've all had to do, and I'm riding it out. I've been safe. I haven't attracted any COVID. But I've also been out there. Down here in Florida. I've done the Renninger Antique Show this winter. It was a huge success. One of the biggest Saturdays they've ever had in the Renninger's history was this past show in February, and that was a telltale moment for me. When I saw how successful that was in terms of public attendance. So we'll keep doing it until we have to, but I'm excited about this show coming up in June. I think we're going to get a lot of attention. The fact that we're making it a 2-day event this year, some of the other things I'm going to do to attract attention by having Benjamin Kilburn there, who's going to come back to life for us. It'll be fun.
Great. Maybe you can round up the Concord High School band to play outside as we all return to a little bit of normality.
Well, that still is in the cards, isn't it?
Okay. Well, listen, we're going to have you back towards the end of May, and you can give us a final briefing of how the fair looks. And we're all excited to get back to fondling books at book fairs again.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope everybody else is, and I hope the customers in New England and around the states near New England will come and visit us, because we're going to be not just live, but we're going to be real.
Great. Wonderful, Richard. We appreciate you taking that risk for our benefit.
Well, show
Talk
up.
to you in a few months.
We'll see you there.
And buy a book. Okay. Super. Very
Thanks.
super. All right. Listen, we're coming in on the end of the show. Is Lee still with us? I want to say goodbye to Lee. I know Barbara Lowe, one of our normal contributors, is busy with the Ephemera show this week. Lee may not be with us. So real quickly here, let me share with you what we can expect next week. Oh,
I'm here.
All right.
Can I show you something?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sorry we didn't get to finish talking to Larry, but I have a copy of one of Flannery O'Connor's college yearbooks from the Women's College of Georgia in Milledgeville. And she was not only a writer, but she was an artist. And sections in the yearbook are illustrated with her drawings, kind of caricature cartoon drawings. And here's one of the, can you see that?
Yeah.
One of the pages. Well, let's see. I'm going the wrong direction.
Oh, that's good, right there.
Okay, this is on the publications section. And each of the special sections like that has a page of some of her drawings. It's really a really interesting other look at her talents.
You know what's interesting to me,
from,
Lee, because
1944.
Fascinating. Lee, you know what's interesting to me, and it's probably because I have no creative talent. Last week on the show, we had Iris Nevins, who does marbled paper and makes and plays Irish harps. It always amazes me, astounds me, how when people are creative in one field, they're often creative in others. Just like Flannery O'Connor was a great author and a talented illustrator and artist as well.
It is, and I think a lot of us wish we could do the same.
I can't even draw a straight line with a ruler.
I think most great art doesn't have a lot of straight lines in it, so maybe you don't need to worry about that.
All right. Lee, we've got a wonderful guest next week, Andrew Stoffer, who's a faculty member of the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia, and he's also author of the book Traces, is going to be on the show. He is discussing his new study of things written in the margins of old books and what that means to the future of libraries.
Well, there's a lot written in the margins.
Yeah, some of us probably think that writing in the margin of a book is near to desecration, but a lot of times, especially books that are used for research, have some fabulous things in the margins from people who use them to write their own books.
Right, as a historical reference, it can be it can really be great, especially if you can figure out what the writing says.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's hard.
All right, folks, that wraps up another edition and another show of the Rare Book Cafe, the Rare Book Lovers Rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. Please join us next week for our show, same time, same channel.